Good evening, everyone. Obviously, a lot of us right now are very angry. We're in shock. This past week has been really hard on a lot of people. We have some of our members and volunteers right now on the way to Houston to do voter registration. We have some to go protesting. There's, I know, a couple vigils tonight, one in Frisco and one in McKinney. So I know if you have to leave early for that, or if you are one of the people that's actually doing a lot of the organizing, this is going to be recorded. It is going to be on YouTube channel. So please, do what you need to do, and we'll make sure that you have all the information that you need. All right, so let me start with our member meeting here. Let me share this screen. So tonight, obviously, this part is the member meeting. We're going to go over some of the information on a lot of our on some of our committees. We are going to try to be very brief this evening because, as I said, there is a vigil for the now 19 children murdered at the elementary school this evening. There's one in Frisco that I know of. There's one in McKinney. So again, if you are going to those, we will try to make sure we get this information, because part of what is going to be discussed is not only abortion, but also how you can be a support network for people who are going through grief. And part of that, of course, is going to be the fact that everyone is going through a lot. We never know what someone is going through. So not pushing one's particular viewpoint on someone else and just saying, hey, I'm here, here's some food, or here's this, here's that. Just make sure that people know that you're there, that you love them, and that you are supportive of them. And just be like, it's okay that you don't know what to say, just be there. It's going to be the biggest thing that you can do for someone. All right, so membership committee. Thank you again to our members who are attending this evening. We are still getting a lot of, oh, oops, I haven't updated my 2022 membership yet. So as a reminder, membership is from January to December. So if you have not already paid your $30 annual dues this year, please make sure you do so. Trish, do you want to add anything as our membership co-chair?
You would say that when I put a chip in my mouth.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Actually, I just want to reiterate what Sarah said. Just remember to update your membership. You can contact me. Well, I was going to say contact Carolyn, but she got bigger fish to fry. So contact me. I'll get you taken care of. If there's anybody that you guys know that would benefit from our group, that that you think would be of assistance to our group, please send them to me and we can get them signed up. So this is a group effort. It's not just membership, it's everybody, pulling together to get us some members in here. So if you know of anyone, just let me know. I don't mind reaching out to people.
That's awesome. Thank you, Trish. And yeah, I will say a lot of people, they volunteer with us, they support us, but they forget to actually do the membership. So please, we're going to go over here in a little bit about the money that we've given to candidates so far, before the big push for the general election, and know that your money does go directly to that. So please, if you have not already, for 2022, make sure that you go to wowdems.org/join, and you can either join or you can renew. If you want to give us a little bit extra, that is amazing. We very much appreciate it, because like Caroline said last session, Beto does not need your $25. Your local candidates need your $25. Beto, however, I do want to say, I thought that was amazing when he went in and confronted Governor Abbott. That was fabulous. So we are very much supporters of Beto, of course. And just know that these local candidates are the ones where your money goes the furthest.
And I just want
Speaking,
to jump in and say, can I just
yes,
say,
please.
it's one thing when you're talking about Beto, it's one thing for us to, talk the talk, but when you actually walk that walk, and it's
Yes,
very visible in what he is doing. He is walking the walk, guys. So we have to get out and support him. We have to, at whatever cost it is. Let's get behind him and get him elected. We need it.
absolutely. Absolutely. No, and literally, like, no matter what, there's always something that we can do. If you don't like block walking or you can't block walk, there's phone banking, there's text banking, there's postcards. If you don't want to block walk, but you want to be the hub for an area that is block walking, you can do that. Maybe give like water or snacks. Literally, everyone has a place and can do something. So yeah, thank you, Trish. Great point. And yeah, speaking of fundraising for our candidates that will be on the ballot in November, we are going to host a fundraising event this summer. We were going to do in person. I don't know. We still might, maybe outside. But due to a lot of the COVID numbers, obviously we'll play that by ear. Thank you so much to the 4 to 5 people, the 5, depending on when it ends up, that have agreed to help and be on the team that are planning this. I will be sending an email shortly, probably after this evening, because I was going to make one last, like, hey, if you want to be part of this team to help us plan this event this summer, please let me know, and I will add you to that email before I get it sent out this evening. But again, thank you to those who said that they would help. Like I mentioned last time, I am not a great party planner, so I very much appreciate the assistance. My skills lie elsewhere. So legislative, this is of course the big thing right now with gun violence prevention and with abortion restrictions, of course. Many of you have probably seen the tweets from Cornyn, Cruz, and a lot of the local House legislators. I personally, just a little bit earlier, saw Leach tweet out and say like, oh yeah, we have to, act, but we can't just do something. We need to have hard conversations. And I absolutely, I was with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America when 80 or so, or maybe it was like 120. Anyway, lots of us went down to the Capitol in 2017 and said, hey, this is, maybe it's 2019. I don't even know. Maybe it's 2017. Time since COVID has been strange. The point is, he looked at us right in the face and said that he would not pass permitless carry. And there was no appetite for it. And yet here we are. He also, of course, voted to loosen restrictions on a variety of other manners. He also, and I had a conversation with him about this, was one of the people that were doing the quote unquote pro-life bills while loosening gun restrictions. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later, but you can't say that you are for loosening gun restrictions and allowing these kids to get shot in their school while claiming to be pro-life. That's not at any frame of any reference what any of those words mean. So it's extremely important that we jump on these people for gun sense. And just because they're a Democrat does not mean that they are a gun sense person. I will say right off the bat that Royce West is amazing when it comes to reproductive rights. He is not that great when it comes to gun sense. I had a very difficult conversation with him where he was like, oh no, I would have never voted for that thing. I'm like, you literally sponsored it. So no, just because someone is a Democrat does not mean that they are a gun sense candidate. Make sure that you hold our Democrats responsible and accountable, just like we would with our Republican legislators. So please make sure you don't take it for granted that just because someone is a Democrat means that they are for gun sense. Oh yes, and I also, in addition, of course, to, as I mentioned, some of the volunteers that are going down to Houston because the NRA convention is there, and a lot of the big push for the, well, I guess kind of a protest, but it's basically like, hey, make sure you're registered to vote and let's actually do something about this. So if you are not already a VDR, Please go ahead and reach out to your county office and get registered, because we are going to have a big push to make sure that people are ready to vote. And due to abortion rights and due to gun sense, there will be a lot of people that want to know what they can do and how to make sure that they make that difference. Speaking of reproductive rights, since that is kind of the theme of this evening, I loved this tweet by Representative Val Deming. She said, "You want to support babies and mothers? Me too. Paid family leave, the child tax credit, gun safety, quality healthcare, great public education. That is a pro-family agenda." And it is 100% true. That was another part of that conversation that I had with Leach, where I said, you know, you can't call yourself pro-life where you're passing a lot of these bills that will get women killed, yet you are against the expansion of Medicaid. Like, if you're talking about abortion, you've already failed that woman 20 times over. Like, this is how we fix issues when it comes to making sure maternal and infant mortality aren't higher. Because unfortunately here in Texas, especially for women of color, it is exceptionally high, and that is not okay. All right, candidates committee update. Laura, I will hand over the reins to you.
Hello. Well, our first, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Our first, of course, we finally have good news. Finally,
Yes.
Caroline Werner, who's one of us, won her election on Tuesday. So that was a runoff election, but county chair was decided for good on, you know, there's no November for that. So that was it. So we're looking forward to new energy in the party and a great environment for volunteers. So we're really happy about that. Before that, we had endorsed Caroline. We also did our first round of endorsements for the November elections. Sheena King, Ira Omer, and Cornwallis. And we did not endorse in the 70 race. We were waiting for the runoff. So we need to sit and meet again and decide what we're going to do for the next round of endorsements. We always do 2 before the runoff and after the runoff. So we talk about that. But anyway, we're really happy about Caroline, and thank you everybody who showed up to vote. I know you all did, so thank you.
Absolutely. No.
Sorry about the glare. Oh my gosh, I can't see you guys, by the way, because I'm wearing glasses and I'm not used to it.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
I apologize if I have a weird look on my face. I usually wear glasses with the computer, so here we are.
No worries, we got each other's back. No, I very much appreciate it. And yes, we are very excited. Obviously, Caroline and Sheena are board, well, technically former board members, because as Trish mentioned, they've got bigger fish to fry now. So yeah, we are very excited to see these women running for office. And please, you know, if you see something where you're like, hey, nobody is in this commission, nobody is in this board, nobody is in, you know, this legislative area, if not me, then who? A lot of times women especially will say like, oh, well, we're not qualified because X, Y, and Z. But a lot of times, you know, especially after talking with some of these, you know, elected officials, it is very much a, if not me, then who? Because a lot of times these volunteers realize that they actually know a lot more about these bills than the elected officials do. One of our volunteers who did end up actually running for office at one point in the last couple of years, she was sitting across from at the time Congressional District 3, Van Taylor, and she was being very quiet. This was kind of her first, you know, meeting, and we mentioned the bills that he had, you know, sponsored and passed and voted for, and one of them was forcing guns onto college campuses. And when I say forcing guns onto college campuses, I mean in Oklahoma, at least, when they passed, you know, guns allowed on campuses, the campus was allowed to say no or yes. Like, we will either allow this or we won't. Whereas in Texas, they were not given that choice. It was a, you must allow this, even though in a lot of the board rooms, they weren't allowed. So it was this very hypocritical thing. And this particular volunteer was a professor at a university. And she was like in the middle of, you know, part of this discussion, she was like, wait, you sponsored that? Oh, now I'm mad. And I was like, yes. Like, this is how we do it. Because a lot of times, you know, like I said, we assume that, you know, we don't have the skill set, or we don't have this, or we don't know that. And trust me, sometimes it is very much, if not me, then who? So thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, Ro, for standing up and saying like, hey, this is not okay. All right, here we go. Let me share this again. Yes, so treasury report. This is what I was alluding to earlier. So Sheena is not on this because we actually gave her money early. So we were able to give Sheena $5,000 thanks to your donations, thanks to your membership. This is one of the big reasons why we want to make sure that we get people who are volunteering, who are supporters, actually becoming members, because this money goes to these candidates. We were also able to give Caroline $1,500. We were able to give Ro $500 so far. And of course, her election is in November. So that this does not mean like it's the end all be all for these candidates, but we are super excited to see all these amazing Democratic women standing up and running. Please make sure that you are supporting these women by supporting us. All right, now, I know I went through all that very quickly. I am going to open it up here for a bit for questions. I am trying to be very cognizant of the time since, like I said, there are the vigils tonight. But again, this is a member meeting, so please let me know what questions you have, what teams you're interested in being a part of, because we do have a lot of activity that's going to be necessary in these next few months, between abortion rights, between the gun sense. Like, there's just, it is exhausting. I know it's exhausting. And this is why it's important that there's so many of us, because that way we can kind of tag in and tag out and say, hey, I'm not okay today. I need to rest. And someone else is going to take that position up at the front line. And then we kind of just cycle back through. But please take care of yourself. Please don't run yourself ragged. We are a team. We will do this one at a time, and we will do this all together. So I will stop recording for a moment while I will pause. Okay, so good evening, everyone. As I mentioned, there are some that are going to be attending some vigils tonight. There is one in McKinney, there is one in Frisco. Those are the ones that I know about in Collin County. I'm sure there are also ones in Dallas County, Tarrant County, Grayson County. I don't know if I already said Dallas, I apologize, Denton County. But yeah, a lot of us tonight, especially, you know, those of us that are parents or, you know, just have empathy and care, are just really brokenhearted by everything that's been going on the last couple of months. So I know there are some tonight. We will make sure that we get information out. Moms Demand Action for Collin County, I know, is planning something for this weekend. As soon as we know more information, maybe I'll get it put in the end of month newsletter. There's going to be a lot of information probably this month, just because everything going on. Again, I will reiterate, it is okay to not be okay. Please make sure you take time for yourself. Please make sure you know, you gather around people that are like-minded, who are able to actually comfort you. It is okay to not know what to say. Just say that you are there, that you are thinking about them. Tonight, we are going to be discussing some difficult topics. We are going to be discussing violence against women. We are going to be discussing abortion. If because of the events of the last couple of months, you are unable to listen to that, that is okay. Do what you need to do. We will make sure we are recording this. We will make sure we are putting it up on YouTube. A lot of the links and the resources and the candidate information, I will make sure is in the description. So please do not overdo it for yourself. Do what you know needs to happen. Again, we are all in this together. We are a team. We will make sure that we take care of each other, so no one has to stand on the front lines by themselves for too long. All right, I also want to make sure I share this formula. We are very aware, of course, that there is a shortage right now. Without going too much into the whole like a fed baby is the best baby, because I know we'll be discussing that in a little bit here shortly. This actually is a great hotline in order to help get resources for formula. So you can call or text maternal health 24-hour hotline. It is 833-9-HELP for the number moms. That is 833-9-HELP for moms. So if you have someone that you know just had a baby, please make sure that they know about this, that it is available, that they are not alone, that they can get help. Again, fed baby is the best baby. And then before I switch over into our speaker mode, I want to mention the National Network of Abortion Funds. It is crucial. We are going to be talking about, obviously here in a moment, about abortion and about a lot of the pieces that really go into maternal and infant mortality. However, right now, women that are just experiencing miscarriage, which means it is a very wanted baby, or maybe they don't even know that they're pregnant. You'll hear a little bit about that later, but they're not able to actually get the help that they need. Pharmacists are actually turning them away. There was a story actually just that I saw earlier. I want to say it was CBS, where basically a woman was denied by the pharmacist the medicine that she needed for her miscarriage because, as they said, we don't know if you're going to be using this for an abortion. So even though these laws have not been passed yet, women are still facing this. They are still dying. It is exceptionally important that we provide this care. So National Network of Abortion Funds has these funds where they say, here's how to find a clinic. Here's how to pay for these things. If you can't pay for them, here is money. It is so, so, so important. So I will make sure that I put the link in the chat. But yes, please, please, please support these groups. And I am actually going to stop share for a moment. And I want to say before we pass over to speaker mode, welcome everyone, because I don't think I did that when I switched over to general meeting. Hello, my name is Sarah. I am the current president of Women Organizing Women Democrats. I very much appreciate you all being here tonight. This is, as I mentioned in our member meeting, an extremely difficult week. For women, we've had just a hell of a last 6 months where it just feels like it's just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And just know that we have your back, know that you have the people that are on this call, the people that are at vigils tonight, the people that are driving down to Houston right now to register voters. You are not alone. And our speaker tonight, I am going to have to be very careful because right now I am in partisan mode, Women Organizing Women Democrats. However, the speaker tonight is actually going to be me in my nonpartisan mode, which we are not going to be discussing, Republicans, Democrats, etc., because I want to make sure that there is no excuse for negating my 501c3 status. But Sarah, as founder of ELF Army of Light, it is a 501c3 supporting the pregnancy loss and infant death community. I will have her give her own story and a little bit of detail on that. However, I do want to say that when it comes to, as I mentioned, just because someone is a Democrat does not mean that they are supportive of these things, whether it is reproductive rights or whether it is gun sense. However, over and over and over again, it has been shown that Democrats have the leadership that actually lowers abortion rates, lowers gun violence. Like, these are things that are common and we can actually fix through policy, and those are our Democratic platforms. So one moment here and I will switch. We'll do the little. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I know several of you, of course, from my community work with Leadership Plano or with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, or with a variety of other groups locally. But a lot of you don't actually know my story and a lot about my nonprofit. So I am here because a lot of the things I talk about are very difficult, whether it is gun laws, whether it is abortion, whether it is religion, whether it is one of 1,000 different things. So tonight we're actually going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about why it is important, why regardless of what culture, religion, background you are from, it behooves everyone to actually support women in this way. So without further ado, I will give you my story. So my first pregnancy was a miscarriage. I ended up a couple months after I found out that the embryo didn't actually develop past the 5-week mark when we actually went in to go hear the heartbeat at 9 or 10 weeks, that we had lost the pregnancy. It was my husband and I's, like I said, first pregnancy. I went ahead and went on a vacation with my sister because we had a road trip planned. And I said, okay, that's, thankfully I have this 2 weeks off from work. That actually was the only time I took time off of work with my pregnancy losses. So I have been pregnant 6 times. I have 1 living child. While my sister and I were on our road trip in Washington, D.C., in fact, I ended up needing to go to the ER because of blood loss. So I spent overnight in the ER because of the blood loss through miscarriages. Often women, it's such a taboo subject when it comes to pregnancy, when it comes to menstrual cycles, when it comes to mental health. Obviously with May, it is Mental Health Awareness Month. All of these things tie together because we go through this collective trauma. But yes, so unfortunately, no one really talks about the fact that every single time a woman actually goes through the pregnancy process, whether it is a miscarriage, whether it is an abortion, whether it is an actual birth of a child, we bleed quite heavily for several weeks. And in some cases we can hemorrhage, and that is what leads people like me into having to go to the hospital. So it was not a pleasant experience for a variety of reasons, emotionally, physically, and I am negative when it comes to blood type. So after all of this lovely experience, I had to get a needle in the ass for RH negative. So yay me. That was in 2013. And in October of that year, actually the day of my birthday, I found out that I was pregnant. As anyone who has experienced pregnancy loss knows, you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're very nervous. You don't want to say anything. You're not sure if you should announce whether or not you're pregnant. The good news is my son was born. He will be 8 next month. But literally every other pregnancy from that moment onward had that constant pressure, that constant fear. And when we do go through things like mass shootings where children are involved, and at elementary schools, those of us that have walked through hell to bring our children into this world are terrified, because we went through everything to bring this child in, and they're not actually being cared for, they're not being protected. In 2017, I had 2 miscarriages. One was on International Women's Day, March 8th, and I took half a day off of work, and the other one was in October. October's not a good month for me and pregnancies generally, except for my son, obviously, because that's when I found out I was pregnant with him. But that was actually the second miscarriage that year was actually a lot more difficult, because that first time that I had gotten pregnant, it was okay, well, I got pregnant that second time that year, so that one's going to succeed. So I went into that particular one thinking this one's going to be it. This one, this one will succeed. This one is the one that's going to be a viable pregnancy. and it ended up in miscarriage. Fast forward through to 2018. Early 2018, my husband, who I had worked with at the same company for 13 years, got laid off in January. His last day working there was March. We found out around his birthday in June that we were pregnant. That was my daughter. Unfortunately, she died the day after, or excuse me, she was born the day after we found out that she died. That was in October. As I mentioned, October is not a great month for us in general. But we actually did not really want to say anything about the fact that we were pregnant because we'd had the history of pregnancy loss. As women, we already blame ourselves. So when we see legislation like that put forward by our Texas Congress, or when we hear things like the domestic flow of babies from our current Supreme Court, it's a slap in the face. Because those of us that very much wanted to be pregnant, that very much wanted babies, we already blame ourselves. Like my first miscarriage, I was telling my doctor, oh my gosh, when I didn't think that I was pregnant, I had this, glass of wine, I flew in a plane, I had this shrimp, and she's like, don't do that. She's like, you are gonna go in a pit that you're not gonna be able to come out of. She's like, do not question yourself. This was not your fault. And that is actually when I learned how often women have miscarriages. So many of you by now may have heard that basically the first week of someone's pregnancy is their period. So that is week one. And many of us do not have consistent periods. Some of us have some that are heavier than others. Some don't even know necessarily or care that they're on their period because they're so light, and oh my God, that must be so nice. But anyways, that's week one. So literally by the time your next one rolls around, approximately 28 days later, you may or may not even know that you're going to be skipping your period because maybe you're stressed, maybe you're eating different, maybe you're exercising different, and therefore your cycle is thrown off. So right now in Texas, at least, because abortions aren't able to happen after 6 weeks, it's too late. And when a lot of people hear my story, like the fact that, I mentioned my daughter, I found out that she was most likely going to die before I found out that she was a girl. So I mentioned, obviously, because of my history with pregnancy loss, that I didn't want anyone, to know that I was pregnant. I didn't want the questions. I didn't want to get stopped in the office. I didn't want to go to baby showers. I wore very baggy clothes. I went in, a little room where I could work by myself. There were only 2 people at work that knew what was going on with me. My Mom's Demand Action leadership group did know. They knew that I was pregnant. Once I found out that there was a 36% chance that she had trisomy 18, they were the only ones that knew that that was what was going on. And after she died, and I was immediately enrolled basically in the hospital that same day, because thankfully my OB is amazing. They were the only ones that knew what was going on and that she had died. So I also wanted to mention, when it comes to laws, when it comes to things like the fact that we have extremely high maternal and infant mortality here in Texas, the fact that our legislators care more about, this embryo than they do about the women, this is the thing that I point to. So with my daughter, we found out basically for sure that she actually did have trisomy at week 16. So at week 12, everything seemed like it was going great. But again, as moms that have gone through pregnancy loss, we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And sure enough, at the end of week 13, I get a call that says, we need you to come into the office. And I said, is everything okay? And they said, well, we just need you to come into the office. And I was like, well, then no. The answer is no, it is not okay. Very stupidly, I went into work. that was a really bad idea. But at the time it was, well, this will distract me. This will, keep me from really having to think about it. Around 11 a.m., I got a call from my doctor that said, hey, I have an appointment with a specialist for you. They can do, I don't remember the name of the procedure, but basically it's this giant needle that they can take and get cord blood and be able to test whether or not, there actually was trisomy 18. And I said, well, that sounds very invasive. Like, what are the risks? And she said, well, there is a chance of miscarriage. I said, then no, I don't want to do it. Like, I've had enough miscarriages. I don't want to do that. And she said, okay, the next chance is going to be after week 15, where they can do an amniocentesis, which again is a giant needle in your belly. It's just at that point, the embryo is actually bigger. And it's, obviously it's still invasive, but it's less risky at least. And I said, okay, we'll talk to the doctor then. So obviously between week 13 and week 16, those 3 weeks were hell. We went into the doctor at week 16. We brought along my son, who at the time was 4, because we at least wanted him to see, her wiggling around and her moving, because this might be the only time that he got to see her. So while the specialist was telling us that there were defects in the brain, there were defects in the heart, and she had the markers of trisomy 18, he was bouncing up and down in his chair saying, I'm going to be a big brother. We didn't actually do the amniocentesis because they said, hey, just based on this ultrasound, here's the information. Here are your options. I was very grateful that they did actually offer termination as an option. For me, I had excellent benefits at the job that I had for 14 years. I had an extremely supportive husband. I had family that lived nearby that could help me out and support me with a special needs child. I had all of this infrastructure that I could take advantage of. I had those choices. Not everyone does. And it was very clear to me in that moment when we were having to plan all these things out, that is a choice that many women do not have. So I chose, regardless of what the decision was, or I guess what the result was on whether or not she did or did not have trisomy 18, that I would be continuing with the pregnancy and, try to give the best chance. And they said, okay, go home. We're not actually going to do the procedure. Come back in 3 weeks. We'll discuss what specialists we need. We'll discuss what NICU is going to look like. We'll talk to you then. We came back in week 19, which technically is still considered miscarriage, not stillbirth, because week 20 is stillbirth. But since she was literally at the end of week 19, I call her stillbirth. And we'll talk about the fact that, what we like to say to those suffering and to those going through grief might not necessarily match with the words that they use. That's fine. Anyway, long story short, the tech came in, turned on the machine, turned off the machine immediately, went out. We were very grateful that the doctor came right in. Another woman that I have had on bereavement panels when we talk to bereavement nurses about what our community needs, what we got, what we'd like to see. She waited an hour to be told that her 32-week-old fetus was dead. We thankfully did not have to wait that long, and we knew immediately what was going on because we've been through this before. Sure enough, the doctor came in, said she's gone. We had the conversation with our son. Again, he was 4. So he said, how do we make her alive again? Can we give her the orange medicine, which was like Motrin, but for him, it was like the worst thing in the world. But we kept saying like, hey, this works. In the mind of a child, what do you do? So again, I was immediately checked into the hospital. And one of the things that the nurse had to mention to me, was required to mention to me, was depending on the weight of the fetus once I delivered, I may or may not be required to provide them with the name of a funeral home before leaving the hospital. Now, I want to make that very clear. I, as a bereaved mother, going in knowing that my child was dead, was required before leaving the hospital not to tell them what counseling I was going to get, not to tell them what physical therapist I had after going through all this, but was required, depending on the weight of the fetus that I was delivering, to tell them what funeral home that I was going to get, because it was the law. That is ludicrous. That is absolutely ludicrous. And that shows you that the care, that the privacy, that the everything that is told to us when passing, you know, these bills that affect abortion, that's what it's actually doing to us, to the women that are actually involved in the situation. You know, these aren't bills that help maternal and infant mortality. You know, these aren't bills that ensure that we have access to prenatal care, to perinatal care, to, you know, mental health care when we're going through all of these things. You know, when I went through those weeks of hell from week 13 to week 19, you know, this is what I was having to deal with. And yet no one in the legislation was looking out for me. They cared more about the potential for that fetus. Like for me, it was the promise of a baby. It was the hope of a baby. I very much wanted my daughter to be born. I wanted to give her the absolute best chance for life. And that just didn't happen. That wasn't able to happen. Obviously, you know, I would have liked for things to have been different, but to have that be the scenario, like if we have people that are so focused on the abortion aspect, and like that woman recently that was denied miscarriage medicine because the pharmacist said you could be using this for an abortion. I've had that medicine. It is necessary. And the fact that if a woman doesn't actually pass the embryo or the fetus, depending on what week the miscarriage or stillbirth was at, we could die. Like we could end up in the hospital like I did on my first one, or we could die because of hemorrhaging. And this isn't about whether or not, you know, a pregnancy is wanted, whether or not, you know, we were aware, or whether or not we had the infrastructure available in place for support. This is about the fact that there is 1,000 things that can go wrong with a pregnancy. And unfortunately, as women, we are very aware of several of them. In 2019, in March, again, 2020 actually, because it was actually after COVID, I had to have a DNC, which technically right now might be considered illegal, but it was because my miscarriage did not want to pass. So once again, I had a miscarriage, and after that I stopped. We decided we didn't want to try again. It was too painful. And we started the process of going through, you know, adoption and foster care. But these are situations that real world women are having, whether or not you know it. You know a woman who has had a miscarriage, you know a woman that has had a pregnancy. When I quit the job that I had been at for 14 years, people that I knew a decade, I was telling them like, hey, I'm leaving, you know, this is my 2 weeks notice. I'm starting this nonprofit. You know, we're going to be providing community resources, non-religious, to the pregnancy, loss, and infant death community. Suddenly I heard stories and people that I thought that I knew, you know, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to my sister. This is what happened to my wife. This is what happened to my mom. And it was this undercurrent of pain that nobody wanted to talk about. Because again, like pregnancy is taboo, menstruation is taboo. Nobody talks about these things, but 1 in 10 to 1 in 4, depending on where you actually grow up in the United States, 1 in 10 or 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage, and you might not even know it. When we talk about, you know, when life begins, science doesn't actually know when life begins because it's kind of a sliding scale. But when we talk about sentience, sapience, you know, yes, I refer to my named daughter, Olivia Eileen, that's actually where the name of my nonprofit comes from, as my daughter. I am also very aware that she could not feel pain, which was great because her brain hadn't finished forming and her heart hadn't finished forming. I've talked to women where half of the brain didn't form. I had a friend who was Mormon. I haven't talked to her in a few years. I don't know if she still is, but she is having twins the organs were growing on the outside, but because that would have resulted, basically stopping that pregnancy, terminating that pregnancy was abortion, she and the twins had to go through that pregnancy until they actually showed up as dead and was able to pass. Like that's horrifying. That's literal like emotional torture. And if you actually do believe that those babies were able to feel pain, you literally just tortured them for months. Sentience and sapience, unfortunately, like that doesn't actually happen. Well, sentience doesn't happen until like, week 30 or so. But most importantly, for these, life begins at conception politicians, we don't actually know when something is fertilized. Like we don't know. 1 in like 800 might not even be fertilized. Like only 80% of eggs, 80% of eggs do not get fertilized. So each one of those is technically a miscarriage. So that was life that never got to happen. Of those, only X percentage get actually attached to the uterine wall. Many of you might have heard about ectopic pregnancies. There's nothing we can do about those. And unfortunately, they can still continue to grow, and that puts that woman at risk. But even aside from that, only a percentage actually get fertilized. Of that percentage, only percentage get adhered to the uterine wall. Of that percentage, only a smaller percentage of those actually survive because of issues with either trisomy 13, 18, 15, or 21. Most of you know what trisomy 21 is. That's Down syndrome. There are some differences in trisomy 21. Some are fatal, some are not. But 13, 15, and 18, most of those are fatal. I didn't even know what trisomy 18 was until my daughter had it. But again, these are situations where these chromosomal imbalances or these chemical imbalances result in a miscarriage, which medically is a spontaneous abortion. So we're putting women at risk when we pretend like we know more than our doctors, when we pretend like we know more than we do about pregnancy. Just like with tornadoes, and I promise I'm going somewhere with this, we don't know why one particular storm turns into a tornado and another one doesn't. We don't know why one particular egg is able to actually develop into a baby and one doesn't. We literally don't know. We have no idea why everything goes wrong in one pregnancy versus the other. And a lot of the truth of the matter is that we don't actually devote a lot of time and research to that. It's kind of taken for granted that your body just works the way that it's supposed to, and that women recover after pregnancy. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of us really before we're pregnant aren't even aware that we're going to be bleeding for weeks on end very heavily when there is a miscarriage, when there is an abortion, when there is a birth of a child. It's really difficult. And unfortunately, we don't provide support. We don't provide comprehensive sex education. We don't provide access to birth control. We don't provide access to Plan B to ensure that you don't even get pregnant from something that happened. We don't provide support to men to know, like, hey, here's how to make sure that you have access to condoms. Here's how to make sure you have access to male birth control, because there was actually male birth control that was put forward, but unfortunately, due to some side effects that many women will tell you, like that's just like the tip of the iceberg for a period, it was stopped. So when we have male allies, when it comes to reproductive rights, we need them to stand up and say, this is not okay. We need to make sure that these women are taken care of, because regardless of what happens, it's a medical procedure, whether it is a D&C, whether it is a miscarriage where we actually need help from the doctor to pass the fetus, whether it is a situation where the life of the fetus or the life of the mother is not going to be viable if the pregnancy continues, whether it is a situation of rape, whether it is a situation of incest, we need to support the woman. We need to support the person who is pregnant, whether that is a a trans woman, a trans man, regardless of the situation, people who can get pregnant, people who have uteruses, we need to make sure that we support them, because we are not looked after. Like I mentioned earlier, like if we're talking about abortion, we have already failed that person. We have failed that person because we did not provide the resources, the support, the community ahead of time before they got into that position. When I was growing up, actually, I grew up evangelical, dominionist, I guess technically now they're called. But I actually protested in front of a Planned Parenthood when I was a child. I was probably around my son's age. I was dragged to a protest, and there were horrifying pictures of aborted fetuses, which unfortunately, as is often the case, are not actually aborted fetuses. They are miscarried fetuses that are used without permission of the mothers, which is horrifying in and of itself. When my dad's sister found out that I had been dragged to one of those, she was very livid and took me to a counter protest at a different Planned Parenthood, where my cousin and I, again, around 8 or 9, held a sign that said, "Keep Bush out of my bush." Bush Senior, by the way. We didn't know what it meant, but everyone was laughing when they saw it. And we're like, why is this funny? Looking back, yes, I get it. It's funny. But at the time, we had no idea what that meant. So it was very interesting because I had literally both sides of this family telling me what this meant and what this did and what, why this was bad and why this was evil. Or why this was necessary and why this, should be everywhere all the time. And I had to do, well, the dreaded words, I had to do my own research. But I did. I asked a lot of nurses. I looked into a lot of studies. I really dug in and realized how much we don't know, how much we don't support women, how much at the time that there are assumptions made. What I will say, again, regardless of country of origin, religion, background, Ireland, who I'm sure all of you know due to the Troubles, is basically all Christian. It's just some are Protestant and some are Catholic. They actually just passed recently the 8th, I guess, amendment or something of that effect. But basically they legalized abortion because it hadn't been. And the way that they did it was that they actually shared stories, because it's the humanity behind a lot of these stories. So instead of it just being about, oh, the unborn, or, oh, you're killing babies, it was about the actual stories of, here is what happened and here's why an abortion was chosen. And here is what this meant for that woman. Here's what that meant for the family. I highly, highly recommend you look into this book. It is called In Her Shoes, Women of the 8th. Don't read it in public, because I do a lot of like audible reading. You will ugly cry. So just read it in private or read it maybe with the book club. So you're all ugly crying together. But like, that is what we need to share. When I talked to my mom after my miscarriage the first time, I didn't talk to her about anything else since then because she was so unsupportive. Her first words were they sure? And I said, excuse me? What do you mean, were they sure? Like, but it's this situation where they get in their minds that like, oh, doctors are just there, trying to get everyone to have an abortion and trying to say like, oh, this pregnancy isn't viable, so we'll just kill the baby. Like, they truly do believe these things. So it's really important that you drive home that like, this is the actual humanity. This is the actual story. This is who these women actually are. When I shared information with her and I said, look, this is what's actually going on. This is what this means. Suddenly she was very perceptive of that and actually very open. She's still a dominionist, but it was a seed that was planted. And we slowly kind of start peeling back some of this misinformation. And it's not always going to be something that like, someone opens their eyes immediately and suddenly, they're they're pro-choice. It's not going to be a situation where when you have someone who's that ingrained in disinformation, in propaganda, it's really hard for them to get out. Like, again, just my story with, I grew up in that propaganda. It is very hard to sort of peel that back. Even after I started finding out information, I was very much still a Hillary Clinton is evil because she supports abortion. Like literally, like I think I made like a little MySpace blog post on that. How far we've come. But yes, like it's so important to actually say a lot of women don't get choices. We have to be able to provide the infrastructure, the support, the network to be able to say, I'm here, I'm listening. This isn't about me. This is about you. What do you need? When my daughter died, my Moms Demand Action leadership, because I mentioned they were the only ones that knew, they actually started a meal train for me, which was amazing and actually was the reason that I wanted to start my nonprofit, because it was so helpful to just have them show up and say, we're here, we love you, like here's a hug, here's food. And it was when I was ready to talk, when I was ready to say, here's what's going on. And it means the world when one of them, or when the nurse that delivered my daughter reaches out and says like, hey, I'm thinking about you on bereaved Mother's Day. Hey, I'm thinking about you, you know, in October, which is both when she was born and Pregnancy Loss and Death Awareness Month. Like, you're not going to remind someone that they've lost someone special to them, that someone special to them has died. They know that. We know that every single day. What it tells us when you say, hey, I remember and I'm thinking about you, is that you remember, that you care, and that you're acknowledging it. And truly that is very powerful. So I really appreciate it. I know, like I said, that this is a tough topic. I am open for questions. I am very open about a lot of these things. Not everyone is, like I mentioned, but sometimes if you have a history of this, or you have a story, when you take that first step, when you take that brick out, suddenly that wall comes down and people that you thought you knew are like, oh my God, here's my story. Here's what's going on in my life. Here's what I went through. There was a volunteer that I worked with a lot, where she actually, her daughter would have been my age, and her name would have been Sarah actually as well. So it was really powerful because, you know, back then women actually weren't even allowed to hold their babies, which, you know, for me, that was lovely closure, was when my husband and I got to actually hold her, you know, got to take a picture, got to actually have that memorializing. Back then it was basically like, we don't talk about it. So what questions do y'all have? Especially if you have family or friends that are anti-abortion and want to know kind of like how to talk to them or how to broach the subject. Like I'll pause the recording